Good evening and welcome to Chasing the Facts. I'm Sam Chase, your host, and guess what? Real estate tax season is upon us. This is January 11th. Tax bills were mailed out, I believe, on December 29th.
That's correct.
Very efficient, the tax office. And with us this evening is our chief assessor, the man everyone loves to love, Mr. Frank Reen. So, Frank, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, and good to be back.
And if you know the drill, so just give us a little bit of a snapshot, your background, your professional background, and then we'll get into the discussion.
You got it. I'm in my 30th year in this racket.
Oh, my God.
I started off in Reading. I was the assistant assessor there for about 6-7 years. They were looking for somebody with some construction background and some appraising background. I was fortunate to have both. They hired me. I stayed there a terrific 6 or 7 years. Took a lateral position here at Chelmsford, and my predecessor retired, and I slipped in, and for the most part unnoticed, and I've been there ever since.
And wasn't that really part of the plan, though? I mean, you were kind of hired to
I think so.
be the next
I think so.
assessor,
I think there was
right?
a bit of a succession plan there.
Right,
Absolutely.
right. So we were doing succession planning long before succession planning was a thing.
Absolutely. We're still doing that.
There you go. The assessor's office, once again, is in the fore. So I suppose I need to say, before we go any further, so I suppose I should make a little bit of a disclosure here. For those folks who are watching who may not know it, I happen to be on the Board of Assessors in Chelmsford here, and I think I'm in my 16th year.
Yes, I think you are.
Maybe it's 17th year, I don't know, but my term is up, I think, in 2025. So you folks are going to have to put up with me for another year and a half. So that's the way she goes. So just want people to know that so that they understand, you know, what the relationships are. So anyway, what we normally do this time of year is we ask Frank to come on the board because the third quarter fiscal year tax bill that was recently mailed out is in fact the official tax bill for the fiscal year. So perhaps you could start off, Frank, by trying to explain that a little bit. Why is it that we call the third quarter tax bill the official bill as opposed to the two previous ones that were sent out between July and December?
The third quarter bill, as you say, we call it the actual bill. That's because the first two bills that are issued are estimated bills. And anybody looking at the first and second quarter bills will note there's no value there, no assessed value, and no tax rate, just the tax amount owed. And that's based on the prior year's taxes paid, split in half, with 3% added to it, and then that's split in half to create two equal payments. The intent of it is to create 25%, 25%. Then, at that point in time, valuations or tax rate have not been certified by the Department of Revenue. With that, we submit all of the analysis to the Department of Revenue, along with all the financials that are necessary for them to generate and certify the rates and the valuations. Once they've done so, we then can issue the actual bills and give a credit for the first two bills that were issued, leaving a balance to split the two payments.
Okay, so depending on how close you came to the estimate, so it's possible that you have overestimated and have collected a little bit more than a quarter of the revenue. So the third bill and the fourth bill would be somewhat less.
Exactly.
And it can also go the other way. You could underestimate, which I think is probably, that's what happens more often than not.
What we try to do also is any new growth, any projects that are done that have a substantial increase, certainly new homes or substantial additions, we try to include the preliminary bills. The idea of it is to help eliminate any sticker shock for the third quarter.
Exactly. Okay, well that's a good explanation of what that bill is and what it represents. And as Frank said, and we're going to talk a little bit later in the program, we're going to look at an actual real-time tax bill, and we're going to take a look at the various fields in there. We'll talk about them and we'll explain them so that when you are looking at your tax bill, you'll have a good understanding of how to interpret the information on there. So before we get into that, though, so perhaps you could take just a minute and explain how the tax rate itself is determined. You alluded a little bit to it just now, recap and so forth. So why don't you get into that a little bit?
In terms of generating how the tax rate is literally generated, keep it with a single tax rate format to keep it simple. It's simply the amount to be raised by taxes divided by the full and fair cash value of the community of the town. It's really just that simple.
So the rate itself is really just a mathematical calculation.
That's it.
Yeah, okay.
That's why you can't go around. People often come in and will compare tax rates with other communities, and incredibly misleading. There are plenty of communities that are much wealthier, if you will, than Chelmsford that have lower tax rates.
But the average tax bill is higher.
Much.
Because their land values are higher.
Values
or their levy amount is higher. Right.
That's correct.
Okay, yep. And that's a very important point, and I find that in talking with folks, sometimes you can't get them off that rate. I mean, I get it, because it's if you don't know the ingredients, it's kind of counterintuitive.
It is.
You know, well, of course, if the rate is higher, your bill is going to be higher. Not necessarily.
This is an example.
Right.
Last year was the tax rate was 1437. This year, I think it's 1362.
And the tax bill is higher.
It certainly is.
And why is that, Frank?
Because the amount to run a town went up, or the levy is higher than it was.
And what else went up?
Valuations went up substantially.
Right, exactly. Okay. So, and that's good for the property owner. To have the value go up as a percentage of the equity that he has invested in there. So that's a good thing. Now, in terms, you talked just a minute ago, you talked a little bit about a single or a unified tax rate, but we don't have that in Chelmsford. So maybe let's talk about that a little bit. How does that work, and who makes that determination?
One of the critical roles in all of this is tax policy. And tax policy is really with the select board. They decide, they make each year, we appear before them, present information to them, for them, to make an informed decision on several different areas. Splitting the tax rate, which I'll get into, small commercial exemption, residential exemption, and open space. Ultimately, the distribution of taxes among those different groups. Sticking with the split tax rate, they have a decision to make. After I present the information of the impact of such a split, what it could be, they have to decide whether to split the rate or leave it the same. The consideration is the burden of the taxes. Ultimately, the tax amount that's raised, the levy, is unchanged, no matter what split it's on, no matter what exemption is adopted. With the split tax rate, it merely shifts the burden away from, depending on how much they split it, away from the residential to the commercial, industrial, personal property. With respect to Chelmsford, we've had this for, I think we're in our 6th year of a split tax rate environment, beginning in fiscal 19.
Fiscal 19 it started, right.
So now we're at a 20% shift. So basically the commercial properties here in town are paying 20% greater than they would be under a single tax rate environment. Conversely, residential enjoy about a, 4 or 5% break, if you will.
3.6 to be exact. I actually worked out the numbers.
Yep.
So again, and that's, we can talk about this and how it works, and it may sound complicated, but I think if you listen to what Frank just said, the concept is actually fairly simple. So under a unified or a single tax rate, commercial property and residential property pay at the same rate. So that rate is multiplied times the value of their property.
Yes.
Under a split scenario, and we'll use the Chelmsford example because the board has elected to do a 20% shift, which, as Frank said, means that commercial property owners will now pay 20% more in taxes than they otherwise would have paid under a single rate.
That's correct.
Okay? So what that does, once the commercial property pays that 20% more, that incremental amount more that they pay is then subtracted from what the residential base pays, and then that's what's left for the residential base to pay. So that's why the tax rate for the commercial property is higher than the single rate, and why the residential rate is lower.
That's correct.
But it's not a one-for-one, which is the whole point of a split rate. So in our town, because of the allocation of property values between commercial and residential. If we say to the commercial property owners, you are now paying at a 20% higher rate, that means the math works out, the commercial property owner pays 20% more than he otherwise would, and the resident gets a 3.6% tax break. So using the current data that Frank presented to the board last November, and this is fiscal 23 information because we didn't have the current
That's correct.
information finalized at that point. So actually, no, that's incorrect. What you showed them was a projection.
Projection.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
it was projected fiscal 24 data. So under a single rate, average residential taxpayer would pay $8,898 in property tax. Average commercial taxpayer would pay $23,821. You do the shift to 120, which is where we have it. Now the commercial property payer pays $28,585, which is $4,764 more than he otherwise would pay, and the resident pays $85.75, which is $323 less. So again, you get a 3.6% savings. So explain now what the board could do. Could they move off that 120? What is the possibility for a split?
They have quite a bit of, quite a few possibilities. They could go up all the way to 150%. They could eliminate it altogether.
Okay, so why is it that in some communities they can go to 175, but Chelmsford can only go to 150?
As issued by the Department of Revenue, they establish what our minimal residential factor is. It has to be a certain percentage and be that way for a number of years before we could ever go off of the 150 to 175, which is the maximum. A number of communities surrounding us are at the 175.
So we would have to continue a split rate and maybe raise it over a number of years, and then at some point, based on all that historical information, the Department of Revenue would do a calculation. They would determine our minimum residential factor requirement, and that would allow us to go to a higher than 150.
That's correct. That's correct.
All right. So I'm not aware. I'm sure you must be, but I'm not. I haven't seen any community where their cap is higher than 150 but less than 175. There must be some that fall into that.
Tewksbury, for one.
Okay, so, but they can't go to the 175, but maybe they go to 160.
I don't know what they're limited, but they're not at the maximum. They could go higher.
So,
the same thing with Andover, I believe.
okay, so the point of the question is that it varies for each community based on whatever the accumulated
Yes, sir.
data has been over whatever period of
That's
time.
right. In terms of what's available to the selectmen. The selectmen, of course, can use any criteria they want to make a decision.
Or none at all.
Or none at all. Really, they have that kind of discretion.
Yeah. Well, some communities are very bluntly honest about why they do it. I remember Rodney Elliott, who now is one of our state reps, when he was on the Lowell City Council. And I'm not telling tales out of school because this is all public information. Rodney was considered the finance guy for years on the Lowell City Council. So every year when the council voted to set the tax rate, and Lowell has always opted for the maximum shift at 175, the Lowell Sun would go to Rodney and they'd say, Councilor Elliott, why is it that you shift the tax rate so heavily onto commercial? And what is your rationale and your criteria for do that? And Rodney would give the bluntest and most honest answer that could possibly be given by any politician. He'd say, because we're trying to give the residents the best break we can. And I've always given Councilor Elliott tremendous credit for being honest and leveling with people. He didn't try to say, well, you know, the commercial people, they produce more traffic, or there's none of that. No. We don't really have any reason other than we're just trying to give people a break. And that's perfectly allowable.
Yeah.
They can do that.
Yep, absolutely.
Some communities try to rationalize it, but who knows, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Who knows? But anyway, it's an interesting thing, and as Frank said, we've had this now since, I think, 2019. The Select Board initially came in back then, I think, at a 127.
That's correct.
And then over the next couple of years, they decided to ratchet it back, and I think that was probably a good decision. Now, they can also make a couple of other decisions. They can also decide to do, and you alluded to this a second ago, a commercial exemption. So explain how that works.
Small commercial exemption, which is something when the Select Board of 2019 did decide to split the rate, they also, at that same time, opted to adopt a small commercial exemption. There are only maybe 14 or 15 communities in the Commonwealth that do this. And basically, it is any commercial building that is valued at $1 million or less and have 10 employees, all business contained therein, have 10 or fewer employees average over a period of a year, can get up to a 10% tax break. They did that. That's the maximum 10%.
Yeah, they did that right out of the gate
Right out of the
in
gate.
2019, and they've continued it.
And continued it. We are furnished with information from the Department of Unemployment Assistance as to businesses, buildings that may have 10 or fewer. So that's our starting point. What happens is
There's quite a few businesses in Chelmsford
quite a few
qualify for that.
they do. In fact, the vast majority of commercial properties probably do. The issue is, or not the issue, but the effect of it is, once again, it's a tax shift within class. So with that, the savings that are realized by those qualifying property owners is then shifted to the non-qualifying property owners commercial in all industrial.
Yes.
And industrial does not have access to this particular exemption, so they bear the burden. So that's why we have 3 tax rates.
Yeah, right, because the personal property tax would be a little bit lower than the rate for the base commercial and industrial.
Right. The personal property tax is representative of what the tax would be had we just had the split rate.
That's a perfect explanation. Yeah, that's exactly, yeah, because that is confusing to some people when they look and they say, well, why are there, I understand why there's 2, but why are there 3?
Right.
And that's the answer. So, all right, so I'm a taxpayer, I'm a residential taxpayer, and I get this bill, and I say, holy Hannah, my value, and actually I can almost say that this year, my value went up substantially. I mean, it didn't go up 3 or 4%, it went up 15 or 20%. What is going on? I think the Board of Assessors doesn't know what they're doing.
That may well be.
What do I do if I feel that I've been overvalued? What's my next step?
Now is your time to act. You see, you get the bill, you see the valuation as you're describing there. You feel that's in excess of what you could possibly get for the property, what you could possibly market it for reasonably. Excuse me. The thing to do is act now and apply for an application for abatement. That you can get those, download those off of our website. You can call, we can mail one out to you. It's a simple form, 1-page form, asks for some simple information, asks mostly that you state your contention. Why do you think your property could not capture in the marketplace what would we have it assessed for? Be mindful of the fact that the burden of proof lies with the homeowner to provide that. So we have to do that. Now, if there are physical issues, you had a garage torn down because of the rain, or whatever it is, describe those things as well.
And believe it or not, folks, as good as the assessors are, there's close to 13,000 properties in town that have to be looked at and valued. So mistakes do occur. And information, it does not always get updated, okay?
I encourage all homeowners to take a look at it. You can get the field guide from my office. You can ask us to come over and take a look at the property, make sure that the descriptive parts of it are accurate. Once again, if you want to file for the application, you want to submit an application for abatement, it has to be into my office no later than February 1st. That's absolute. Anything filed after that or attempted to file there is no jurisdiction.
So I think most folks, let's see, I'm trying to remember the day now. I believe the bills were mailed out on December 29th. Do you, off the top of your head, do you recall what day that was? I don't. But I believe I got...
Thursday or Friday, probably.
I think it was yeah, and I had my bill on Saturday.
Yep.
Okay, before the new year.
Yep.
All right, so that gives you an entire month, really, to fill out that form. And again, and if you're not really sure what to do, you can certainly get it by the download or calling and they'll mail it. But you want to come in the office and get your form, then the staff will help you and give you some guidance on the kind of information you need to include. So do that early in the process, and you've got plenty of time to gather your facts or whatever it is you want to put before the assessors.
I just want to say anything that you file the application with, you're going to attach anything to that application. You're not limited to that form. Pictures or appraisal, perhaps, or market analysis. Whatever the homeowner has that they feel makes the case for them, frankly.
And abatements are granted for both residential and commercial. Describe that process so that they put in their forms. What happens next?
Then we take a look at them. We go through them. We take them first come, first served, generally speaking. I then, either myself or my assistant will go and take a look at the property if that's warranted. And then we come back and we make a recommendation. We review with the board of assessors, of which you're the chair, obviously. And then I make a recommendation. The board often comes back to me and asks questions, asks me to reach out to the property owner for more information. With that information gained, the board then makes a recommendation. And
so it's a board decision.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So and mostly we agree with your recommendation. I've been on the board 15 plus years, and I can only think of a handful of times where we've said to Frank, no, we don't agree, and
That's correct.
we're going to do something different.
I'm still annoyed by it, but that's fine.
That's okay. That's all right, But that's good. So that's that process. So I thought what we do now, and if Velo can put the thing up on the screen for us, I thought what we do is we take a look at the third quarter real estate tax bill, and hopefully people can look at that. And you're going to see right away, I didn't block anything out. I got nothing to hide. This happens to be my tax bill. And I can do that because it's my property.
Yep.
And actually, most of this information is generally publicly available anyway by means of the field card, which can be accessed on the assessor's website.
Right.
But let's take a look at my tax bill. And one of the reasons I like to look at my bill is because it's very interesting, but my particular property usually comes very, very close to the average single-family residence tax bill. So it's actually a good bill to look at. It's representative of the average situation. So anyway, let's start at the top, and the viewer can follow along on the screen. We've got it's kind of hard for us to see, so we've got the actual copy here.
Yep.
All right, so up here in the upper right-hand corner is the title. Tells you fiscal year 2024 third quarter bill, and that's already been explained. Now, what's this Chelmsford Arts and Technology thing? What's that all about?
That apparently that gives the taxpayer the opportunity to contribute to the Arts and Technology Education Fund. I believe they can check off anywhere up to, what, $25, is that what that says?
Yeah, or they can put in any other amount.
That's correct, yep.
And if they do that, if I'm a taxpayer and I want to give $25 to the Arts and Technology Fund, I'll make a check mark there, and then that actually adds $25 to your tax bill, okay? But that money then goes to the Arts and Technology Fund. So that's basically a checkoff mechanism. So, so that, if you elect to do that, that actually will affect your bill because it'll increase it by the amount that you want, but it has nothing to do with the tax owed. Okay. All right. So then we've got the standard information. Now, over here on the extreme left, we have the tax rates per $1,000 evaluation, and these are the rates per 1,000, right?
Yep, exactly right.
Residential, commercial, and industrial. So there you go. All right. Now, very important. Let's go over to the extreme left where it says property description. And what Frank said initially when we started the conversation is your two bills that you already received previously, first and second quarter fiscal 24, were estimates and did not contain this information because at that point it had not yet been determined.
That's correct.
Okay, so why don't you talk a little bit about this?
What's happening here on the far left is, because
Yep.
much of this information contained in these bills is mandated by the Department of Revenue that we have to put it in there. So we're looking at the land area, that has to be in there as it would deed it to you. To the right of that is what they call the class or the land use code or state use code. In this case, it's a 101.
So 101 means what?
Single family.
Okay.
Each type of property has a different code. A two-family is a 104, condo is a 102, and so on. Book and page is the legal reference. You could take that, go to the registry of deeds, and bring up your deed.
Look
and
up
you
your
could-
property.
Then you could contain in there, you can keep going back and do formulate the whole chain of ownership of the property. Obviously, the deed date is the deed that you purchased the property. Land value,
Now, here we go. This is the interesting part.
land value, building value, total value. To develop those two components, land and building, we have to do fairly extensive analysis on about 325 different sales, in this case for single-family homes. Land is done by land extraction, given the sales approach. We simply take the sale price, back off of the land value that we're carrying, leave it in the what they call a residual effect, and then that's how we determine the building value, the land value. Let's see, so small. Special assessments surrounding it. That would be for betterments, water lanes, that sort of thing. And of course, we have the Community Preservation Fund, which was probably passed not too long after I was here.
Yeah. Okay. Community preservation, yeah, that's an action that the town meeting took, and that actually adds to your tax bill as well by whatever the
1.5%.
percentage is. Is it 1.5 now?
1.5% with the first $100,000 valuation.
And that money
of
is set aside, and it can only be used for 3 purposes.
most notably lately. What's the property? Pine Hill. The Pine Hill.
Yeah,
coolest property.
purchase of open space.
That's right.
Okay. It can be open space purchase, it can be historical preservation, or it can be housing.
It has to be
Okay.
each one of those
Right.
each year in part.
Let's get back a little bit to the value section here, because I think this is very important. So Frank generally described the process and talked about the market sales and so forth, which you look at that to establish the market. But the actual building value also is dependent, or can be dependent on the condition of your actual structure. So if you build something that's brand new, okay, that's one thing. If your house is 50 or 60 years old, there's going to be some depreciation.
Which is a factor in there.
Right.
When we value building values here in town, each one is valued replacement cost new, less depreciation.
Right.
So my home is 120 years old. So when I value,
So in other words, it isn't worth
it
anything.
isn't worth it. So I value replacement cost new is if today's materials, today's labor costs. Then we back off with depreciation, recognizing that it was built in 1900. It's going to have wear and tear. Now, with that gives us our depreciation. I've also done a lot of work on the home over the years, so that depreciation is less than it might be otherwise.
Right. So if you've kept your house up or even made some enhancements, it tends to offset
That's correct.
some of the depreciation. So you might have a house that's 60 years old, and I know looking at different towns and how they do this, they use different terms. But in our town, we talk about average, and then if it's above it, it's a +10 or a +20.
That's right.
Some towns they call it average, good, excellent, whatever.
Right.
You know, but
Yep.
it's the same idea, right? So if you've got an old house and you're valued at average +20, then that's probably an indication that you've really kept up with the repairs.
What that really talks to is the
Yep.
grade or the quality of the construction.
Yep.
The way we really like to approach depreciation is what we call an effective year. We have the year built, 1900, then we have effective year built, and we continually adjust that.
And one thing I've noticed in looking at those numbers in Chelmsford, that nothing was ever built before 1900.
Doesn't seem that way.
Because that's what the cards all say for the older
a lot of
homes.
that is information that we
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
Some of them were destroyed years ago. That's our best information.
So, trust me, folks, a lot of houses in Chelmsford were built before
Well, and that's
1900.
where the Prescott
Talk,
Brothers have been.
talk to the Historical
resource.
Society.
Yeah.
Frank, Great to have you. We're out of time. I wish we could talk some more because I do have some other questions.
We can do this again.
And we can do this again. Maybe we'll have to do it again. You never know. So anyway, thanks for coming, and we'll see you again soon. That is a wrap.